In the shadowy hills of Missouri, 1876, there stood a quiet village called Ash Hollow, where fog clung to the valleys like old secrets. At the center of that town stood a small butcher shop, its sign swinging gently in the wind, creaking with each gust. Miller's Meats, since 1859. Inside worked Elias Miller, a man whose hands were steady with the knife, but trembling when he prayed. His face carried the weight of silence. His blue eyes looked as though they had seen too much and spoken too little. He lived alone above his shop, a place that smelled of pine wood, sawdust, and blood. Elias hadn't always been this way. Once, laughter filled his shop. His wife, Clara, used to sing while she wrapped the meats, and the sound of her voice turned the dull rhythm of work into music. But 3 winters ago, she had died giving birth to their stillborn child. Since then, Elias's world had been one long winter. The townsfolk pitied him, yet kept their distance. "He's a good man," they said, but something broke in him the day Clara died. And perhaps it had, for in the quiet of his shop, among the hanging slabs and crimson stains, Elias sometimes thought he heard something strange. Not the hum of flies, not the creak of wood. It was softer, closer, almost like whispering. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination. The mind, after all, could play cruel tricks on a lonely man. But one cold night, as the lantern light flickered and shadows danced across the butcher block, Elias heard it again. "Help me." He froze, his breath caught in his throat. The sound came from the table, from the pork shoulder he had just sliced. He leaned closer, eyes wide, the air thick with the smell of iron and fat. Nothing. Then, faintly, "Don't forget me." The cleaver slipped from his grip and clanged against the floor. The noise startled him back to reality, and for several minutes he stood there trembling, staring at the meat. "Grief," he whispered to himself. "Just grief and loneliness." But as he turned away, a single drop of blood slid from the slab and fell onto the floor, landing with a sound that seemed to echo far too long for something so small. That night, Elias dreamed of Clara. She stood in a meadow, bathed in moonlight. Her dress, once white, was now soaked in red, and her voice came to him like the wind through trees. "Elias," she whispered, "you're not listening. The dead are hungry for peace." He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. For hours he sat in silence, staring at the empty cradle in the corner. He tried to pray, but no words came. The next morning, when he opened his shop, the whispers were back. Only now they weren't a single voice. They were many, overlapping, sorrowful, pleading. Elias pressed his palms against his ears. "Leave me alone," he shouted. But even then he could hear them, like the low murmur of wind through a graveyard. Days passed, and Elias's condition worsened. He stopped shaving, his hands shook, and his eyes carried a wild light. Customers began to notice. "Something's wrong with Miller," the blacksmith whispered. "Poor man's lost his wits," said the pastor. But Elias wasn't mad, not in his own mind. He was haunted. Every cut of meat he touched seemed to carry a story. He began to hear names, see flashes of faces, a young woman crying, a man drowning, a child gasping for air. And one afternoon, when he asked aloud, "Who are you?" the answer came, clear and cold. "We are the ones you cut, the ones who died wrong." He dropped the knife and staggered back, his apron splattered with blood. The words rang through his head like bells of mourning. The ones who died wrong? It wasn't just animal flesh he was cutting, he realized. Something deeper had attached itself, something that remembered. The next morning, a farmer named Silas Cook arrived with a small calf to slaughter. The animal was young, its eyes wide and frightened. the soft hair around its muzzle still damp with morning dew. Elias hesitated. He felt something twist inside him. Pity, or perhaps warning. He gripped the cleaver tightly, raised it high, and then froze. In his head, the voices screamed, "Not this one! Innocent, innocent!" His hand shook violently. He couldn't do it. He dropped the blade, panting. The calf bleated softly, pressing its face against his apron, trembling. "What's the matter with you?" Silas barked. "Ain't never seen you flinch before." Elias's lips quivered. "Take it away," he whispered. "Please, I can't." The farmer spat on the floor and left, in disgust. But Elias stood there for a long time after, staring at the spot where the calf had stood. From that moment on, he swore never to kill again. He would only cut what had already been taken. Yet deep down he knew, even that promise wouldn't silence the voices. Across the narrow street lived Mrs. Abeline Turner, a widow in her 40s who ran the small bakery beside the church. She had known Clara, once baked the wedding cake for their union. She noticed the butcher's fading health, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he bought flour or salt. One morning, she knocked on his door, holding a loaf of warm bread. "You need to eat, Mr. Miller," she said softly. "You look pale as death." Elias hesitated before accepting it. When their hands brushed, a flicker of warmth passed through him, a reminder of life he had long forgotten. That evening he sat at his lonely table and tasted the bread. It was simple, sweet, and warm, a reminder of how human kindness could still reach him. But as he ate, he heard a new whisper, gentler this time. "She's kind. Don't lose her too." He froze mid-bite, tears stinging his eyes. The voices weren't always cruel. Some, it seemed, were warning him, or perhaps guiding him. A few days later, a boy named Tommy Barker, an orphan who swept floors and ran errands for coins, came to the shop. "Mr. Miller, I can help clean," he said shyly, broom in hand. Elias, desperate for company, nodded. Tommy's laughter soon filled the empty shop, echoing where only sorrow had lived. One afternoon, Tommy brought a tiny piglet, wounded and trembling. "Found him by the creek," he said. "Can we keep him?" "Just till he's better." Elias studied the creature. Its eyes were clear, innocent, untouched by whatever darkness plagued the shop. He sighed. "All right. But you're feeding him?" Tommy grinned. They named the piglet Bram. From that day forward, something strange happened. The whispers began to fade. The presence of the boy and the little pig filled the place with a quiet warmth that even ghosts seemed to respect. For the first time in months, Elias began to feel human again. He laughed with Tommy, shared breakfast with Mrs. Turner, and repaired the sign above his door. Life, fragile as glass, was slowly finding its way back into his world. But one stormy evening, when thunder rolled like cannons and rain lashed against the shutters, the peace shattered. The whispers returned, louder than ever, shrill and desperate. "They buried us wrong. We were not meant to die." Elias fell to his knees, clutching his head. "What do you want from me? What are you?" A final voice, heavy with sorrow, answered, "Listen. Find us." And then the storm took the rest. The next morning the world seemed unusually still. Fog hugged the hills like ghosts waiting to be seen. Guided by the whispers that still echoed faintly in his mind, Elias walked beyond the town's edge, past the river bend, and into a stretch of land no one had used for years, the old Harlan property. The ground was uneven, the air damp with rot. Elias felt something cold curl around his heart. He knelt, pressing his hand to the earth. It was soft, disturbed recently. He began to dig. Hours passed. The sun sank behind the trees. His fingers bled as they clawed through mud and root. Then, The shovel struck something hard. Bone. And not just one. A dozen. Skulls. Broken ribs. Human remains tangled in cloth and rusted chains. Elias dropped the shovel and staggered back, breath frozen in his throat. Around him, the air seemed to hum with unseen presence. The voices returned, soft and mournful. "You found us." He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Dear God, what happened to you?" But the wind only whispered back, "Justice." The next morning, Elias stumbled into the sheriff's office, mud-caked and trembling. "Sheriff Harlan," he gasped, "I found them. Bones, dozens of them, out near your father's old property." The sheriff, a broad man with a trimmed beard and cold eyes, frowned. "Bones? You mean animal bones?" "No," Elias insisted. "Human. I saw them, men and women. You have to come see for yourself." Harlan leaned back in his chair, studying him. "You've been working too long in that shop, Miller. You're hearing things that aren't there, seeing things that ain't real." "I'm telling you the truth," Elias shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "They spoke to me. They begged me to find them." The room fell silent. The sheriff's lips curled in mock pity. "Voices in the meat, huh? That's what they're saying around town. That you've gone mad." Elias's heart sank. He realized no one would believe him. As he turned to leave, the sheriff's cold voice followed him. "Stay off that land, Miller." "Some things are better left buried." Elias didn't answer, but as he stepped into the sunlight, a cold certainty filled him. If the law wouldn't listen, he would have to bring the truth into the light himself. After that day, the town whispered about Elias Miller more than he ever heard the dead whisper to him. They said he'd lost his mind, that he dug up the hills like a man looking for ghosts. But the truth was, ghosts were looking for him. He stopped opening his shop regularly. The cleaver stayed clean, the windows dark. Yet each night, the whispering came stronger, not from the meat this time, but from the wind itself. They called to him through the cracks in his walls, through the grain of the wooden floorboards. "He knows. He buried us. Bring us peace." He began writing down names as he heard them. There was Samuel Creedy, a drifter missing for 5 years. Mary Harlan, the sheriff's cousin who vanished one summer without a trace. And more. So many more. Elias realized with dawning horror that these were not random deaths. The Harlan family, the same family that owned the land where he'd found the bones, had secrets buried deeper than the roots of Ash Hollow itself. The whispers weren't curses. They were witnesses. It was late one night when the final piece fell into place. A faint voice guided Elias beneath his own floorboards, where he had stored Clara's old belongings after her death. There, under dust and splinters, he found a small box. Inside it, Clara's handwriting. It was her old ledger, the one she used to keep track of their shop accounts. But on the last page, the ink had faded and smeared, a hurried note that froze Elias's blood. "They come from Harlan's men. I saw what they did near the creek. They won't let me tell. If anything happens to me, forgive me, Elias." His breath caught. The realization hit like thunder. Clara hadn't died from childbirth complications. She'd been silenced. The whispers began to wail, their pain shaking the air around him. "Justice! Justice, Elias!" He clutched the ledger to his chest, tears streaming down his face. "I'll make it right," he whispered. "I swear I will." That night, a fire blazed on the outskirts of town, bright enough for all of Ash Hollow to see. The Harlan barn went up in flames before midnight. The inferno lit the sky red, the smoke curling like black serpents toward the stars. Some said they saw Elias walking toward it, his coat catching the light of the fire, his face calm as though he were delivering judgment itself. Sheriff Harlan and his men rushed to the scene, but by morning, half the property was ash. No lives lost, but inside the ruins people found old chains, scorched bones, and buried coffins that had never seen proper graves. The sheriff tried to dismiss it, calling Elias a lunatic arsonist, but rumors spread faster than fire and whispers that maybe, just maybe, the butcher had uncovered something the Harlans had been hiding for years. By dawn, Sheriff Harlan was gone. He left Ash Hollow without a word, and for the first time in years, the whispers were silent. For weeks, Elias felt peace he hadn't known since Clara's death. No more voices in the walls, no cries from the cutting table, only the sound of wind through the trees and the distant laughter of Tommy and Mrs. Turner as they brought life back to the shop. He no longer worked as a butcher. The cleaver, once a symbol of his craft, hung clean above the door like a relic of another man's sins. Instead, Elias used his hands for something gentler. He began carving. Wood, not flesh. Doves, not bones. Each piece was shaped with care, each curve holding quiet repentance. The townsfolk slowly returned, offering him cautious smiles. Some even said he seemed lighter, though no one could explain why they sometimes heard faint murmurs of gratitude near his window at night. With the shop no longer selling meat, Elias transformed it into a small community kitchen. He cooked simple meals for the poor, beans, bread, stews, nothing fancy, but served with warmth. Tommy worked beside him, laughter bright and unburdened. Mrs. Turner baked bread every morning and brought it fresh from her oven. Slowly, Ash Hollow began to change. Where once they had seen a broken butcher, they now saw a man reborn. One evening, as the three of them sat outside watching the sunset, Mrs. Turner smiled softly. "You've changed, Elias," she said. "There's peace in your eyes now." He looked out toward the fading light. "No," he said gently, "not peace. Listening. I just learned how to listen, and for the first time in years he meant it." Winter crept over the Missouri hills again. The shop, now called the Hearth of Ash Hollow, glowed with candlelight. Elias spent most of his evenings carving small figurines, angels, children, animals. He said they were prayers made solid. One night, Tommy accidentally knocked one over. It hit the floor and cracked slightly. As he picked it up, he froze. There was a faint sound. "Thank you." He blinked, looking around. "Mr. Miller? Did you say something?" Elias turned, smiling knowingly. "No, lad. But maybe someone else did." Tommy didn't understand, but the old man did. The voices hadn't gone. They had simply changed. No longer cries for justice, but whispers of peace. The next autumn, the town held its first harvest festival since the fire. Mrs. Turner convinced Elias to bring his carvings to sell. He was hesitant, but she insisted, "Let people see what your hands can do when they heal instead of harm." At the festival, children gathered around his stall, marveling at the delicate wooden angels. A young woman picked one up and said softly, "It feels warm." Elias smiled. "Maybe it's the hands that made it," he said. Later that night, lanterns floated into the sky. Elias watched them rise, each flame a prayer for someone lost. As he looked up, he felt a familiar warmth on the wind, a whisper so faint it could have been the breeze. "We're free." He closed his eyes and let a tear fall, smiling through it. Years passed. The story of the butcher who heard voices faded into legend. Children whispered it by candlelight, and travelers repeated it at inns, half ghost story, half sermon. Then, one gray morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to the Ash Hollow Church, written by a dying man in Kansas. The letter was signed Sheriff Henry Harlan. Inside was a full confession. He and his father had killed several people years ago, travelers, workers, and one woman who knew too much. Her name was Clara Miller. They buried her with others near the creek, staging her death as childbirth gone wrong. He wrote, "Tell Elias Miller he was right. I see them now too, every night. I hear them. Forgive me, if God still listens to a man like me." The letter reached the town after Elias's deathbed. Days had already begun, but Mrs. Turner read it aloud in church anyway. The congregation wept, and that night, no one in Ash Hollow doubted anymore. The butcher hadn't been mad. He had simply heard what others refused to listen to, the truth. Elias's final days were quiet. Snow fell thick across the hills, muffling all sound. He lay in his small room above the shop, Tommy, now nearly grown, at his side. "Mr. Miller," the boy whispered, "you rest now. I'll take care of the kitchen." Elias smiled faintly. "You've got a good heart, lad." The world needs hearts that listen. As the candlelight flickered, his eyes turned toward the window. "They're calling me again," he murmured. Tommy leaned closer. "Who is?" "The voices," Elias whispered, his breath shallow. "But this time they sound like music." His chest rose one final time, then stilled. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Ash Hollow in silence, pure as forgiveness. When spring returned, the town gathered to honor Elias Miller. They buried him beside Clara in the meadow beyond the creek, where the wind always whispered softly through the reeds. Mrs. Turner and Tommy transformed Miller's Meats into the House of Peace. It became a home for orphans, widows, and the hungry, a place where no one was turned away. Every winter on the anniversary of Elias's passing, they lit a single candle in the window, a tradition that continues long after. And some say that when the wind blows through the Missouri hills on those nights, if you stand very still, you can hear a soft murmur carried through the air. Listen to the lost. They only want to be remembered.